What's up, guys? Of course, I did mention that I was going to make another tornado history video today on April 11th, so today's April 11th. Just a few key notes. April 8th marked the 17th anniversary of a violent F5 tornado that went through Birmingham, Alabama, and it was a nighttime tornado, so it was pretty bad. It killed about 28 people. It was a devastating event. It was then followed. It was one of two F5s that hit in the year 1998. Yesterday is on a Thursday. You all remember. You saw on TV. You've seen the video on my timeline of that violent tornado that went through northern Illinois, hitting Rochelle and Fairdale, Illinois. You saw it on live TV. As of right now, that tornado has been rated an EF4 with winds at 180 to 200 miles an hour. It could be increased, but I give it a 1% chance that it'll be upgraded to an EF5. I do not see that thing producing that high of damage. But it, apparently, I said, the day before that, 3 days ago, that we were going to have our first EF3 plus tornado, and sure enough, I was right. We didn't have an EF3. We jumped from 2 to 4. This is the first EF4 since Alpena, South Dakota on June 18th, so it's been nearly 10 months since we had a violent touchdown. That was part of the Pilger system, in which those twins occurred two days prior to that. There's a couple of infamous events that I want to talk about. The big one will be at the end. Now, 68 years ago, in 1947, on April 9th, this was a nighttime tornado. It's called the Glazier-Higgens Woodward, Oklahoma tornado family. It was a tornado thought to have left a 220-mile continuous path from Texas to Kansas, including the city of Woodward, Oklahoma. It turned out in later studies that it was a family of about 6 to 9 separate tornadoes from that particular supercell that lasted from Pampa, Texas to St. Leo, Kansas. And the tornado itself killed 181 people. The main one, which was an F5, it's not officially an F5 because it occurred before 1950, but it's widely accepted that way. The tornado touched down near White Deer or southeast of Pampa, and it was moving at about 45 miles an hour. Glazier and Higgins, Texas were small towns, as you can imagine, post-World War II. They didn't have high populations, and Glazier and Higgins, which are on the border of Texas and Oklahoma, were completely wiped away. The tornado continued to the northeast and was approaching the Woodward metropolitan area. And when it went through, the tornado was not only at its peak intensity, but it was at its widest. And you would not believe this, the tornado was reported to have gotten up to 2 miles in width, making it one of the widest tornadoes on record. Of course, we all know what the widest one is. The tornado killed 101 people through Woodward. That tornado is the deadliest in Oklahoma State history, despite the fact that we've had several violent tornadoes go through the Oklahoma City metropolitan area, such as Moore 2 years ago, Oklahoma City metro area back in 1999. So, damage included, there was actually a couple that were reported to be thrown 1.5 miles from their directions in the opposite directions, which means they were found 3 miles apart. Basically, every building looked like it had exploded because of difference in wind, air pressure. Tornado is a low pressure. You got high pressure building up inside of a structure. Try to equalize that. Well, back then, people thought opening windows, would equalize everything. That actually enhances your chances of losing your house. A tornado causes its damage due to high winds and some of the debris that it carries pelting it. The tornado dissipated shortly after it hit Woodward, and some of the damage included entire buildings wiped out, houses completely swept away, trees that basically vanished. The most extreme damage that I found was a 4-ton lathe, that you find in wood shop. It's a shop machine that it's a lathe. You can make baseball bats. You can make candle holders. The works. Candle holders. Anything wood vertically, baseball bats, things like that. 4-ton lathe was ripped out of its anchor. It was anchored into a concrete floor. It was ripped out and tossed a block and a half. Another tornado touched down. It was only about an F3. Intermittent tornadoes. The tornadoes were really not that strong after the F5 had dissipated, but the storm continued into St. Leo, Kansas, where an additional 2 people were killed. The main tornado, the F5, was on the ground for 125 miles through 2 states. And it was, at the time, up until the Joplin tornado, was the deadliest tornado in the United States. Until the Joplin tornado became the deadliest tornado since that particular event. 64 years. Now, April 10th, 1979. Well, also, as a side note, in 2009, a EF4 slammed through the Nashville suburb of Murfreesboro. It only killed 2 people. It was only one of 2 EF4s that year. The other one I mentioned, February 10th, that hit Lone Grove and Ardmore, Oklahoma. Very rare for that state. On April 10th, 1979, 36 years ago, a 1.5 mile wide tornado. It was the part of a Red River tornado outbreak, a outbreak that had broken out along the Oklahoma-Texas border. It primarily affected, the hardest hit area was Wichita Falls, Texas, which I had mentioned earlier this month, just about a week ago, was hit by an F5 in 1964. Well, 15 years and 1 week later, it dropped out of the sky. It was a multiple vortex. It started out as 3 vortices that actually spun into one gigantic tornado, and it just grew and grew and grew as it went into the most populated areas of Wichita Falls versus the F5 that hit the Air Force Base and not a big population. It hit on the other side of town. 46 people were killed by this particular tornado, and it was preceded by an F4 that killed about a dozen people in Vernon, Texas, and an F2 near Seymour. For 46 miles, give or take, 46, 49 miles, it was a long track tornado. It killed 46 people and caused $400 million in damage, making it at the time the costliest tornado in United States history. The damage was extensive. Of the 46 people killed, 26 were killed in their automobiles because the tornado hit at about 6 p.m. Central. So it was getting dark, and obviously it was rush hour. People tried to outrun the tornado, which do not do that. Even though new studies have come up, drive south to get away from the funnel, drive east, south, or southeast to get away from it. But that doesn't always work. But there was no place for people to go. The tornado had several photographs taken of it. It reached 1.5 miles wide, destroying entire subdivisions. You're probably thinking, well, was this tornado an F5? Surprisingly, no. It was an F4. But it was a high-end F4, and at the time, F4 tornadoes had winds of 207 to 260. The wind speeds, more than likely, it was around 250 miles per hour if they did a survey. Or they did do a survey. The tornado then took on a characteristic. After it left the city, it became 5 satellite tornadoes. Not vortices, 5 distinct satellite tornadoes. After it near Dean and Byers, Texas, and then it crossed into Oklahoma and dissipated near Waurika. The supercell then went on to produce a F3 that killed about a couple of people in Lawton, Oklahoma. It stood the test of time as the costliest tornado, as I mentioned, until the 1999 Oklahoma City F5. 20 years and 24 days later, where it was the first $1 billion tornado. So far, in this case, the damage amounted to $400 million, 46 people dead, 1,700 were injured. It was a major metropolitan area, and it hit a highly densely populated area. It hit the south and eastern portions of the city, while that F5 had hit the west and north sides. It was like this. And at the time was recorded as one of the widest. Now, April 11th. Today marks the 50th anniversary of the third most violent tornado outbreak ever to occur. But this outbreak, of the 3 violent outbreaks, now, the 3 most violent outbreaks all occurred in the month of April. I already mentioned the super outbreak. That had 23 F4s, 7 F5s. That has the most violent tornadoes at 30, which is about 1 out of 5 for that outbreak, because a little bit less than 150 touched down. This outbreak, it started in Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois at about noon, and it produced a long track F4 that went through Illinois and Iowa, I think into Wisconsin. It wasn't a tri-state, but it only killed about 1 person. But that was just the beginning. It wasn't until the late afternoon hours, and the temperatures. This was the Palm Sunday outbreak of 1965. April 11th, 1965. We've had 3 Palm Sunday outbreaks. This was the most violent. So as the day goes along, the temperatures were in the 80s and the dew points were extremely high, which made it a very, very volatile environment for a deadly outbreak. So, a couple of hours go by, the system makes its way, through Illinois, and then at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, all hell breaks loose. Now, you've seen pictures of some of the tornadoes, or the most famous tornado of the outbreak. This particular outbreak is focused on an area that stretches from about South Bend, Indiana to Cleveland, Ohio. Now, when the storm system went into Indiana, we had three waves, three distinct lines of tornadoes. We had a northern line that produced about 8 tornadoes. We had a middle line that was about 100 miles to the south that passed just to the north of Indianapolis. And then we had a short line about 50 miles further south. The middle line crossed into Ohio, but it was the northernmost line that was was the most volatile. The first tornado that dropped out of the sky was Dunlap, Indiana. Now you're thinking, okay, but this tornado was photographed as a double tornado. This thing had 2 funnels. It was a multiple vortex, which means they were literally spinning like this around as they went from southwest to northeast. It destroyed several subdivisions, and it was photographed famously by the Elkhart Truth reporter by the name of Paul Huffman. He snapped a series of photographs as the tornado went from left, crossed the road and railroad tracks that were next to him, into houses that were behind a line of trees. This tornado was so strong that it carried an airplane wing for 35 miles and deposited it into Michigan. And this was just the start of things to come. So after that tornado goes through, a second double tornado strikes the nearby community of Rainbow Lake. That lifts, it's one of the least known. The third tornado in that line was another double tornado that struck about 90 minutes after the first Dunlap. It went through Dunlap, passed about 3 miles away from the path of the first tornado to the west. It leveled a well-built truck stop, and 6 people died there. In all, the first Dunlap tornado killed about 17 people. The second Dunlap tornado killed 36. In addition, 2 tornadoes went through southern Michigan, hitting Hillside. They hit about an hour apart. They followed almost the same exact path. They got so bad they couldn't differentiate the paths. Was this tornado number 1 or tornado number 2? Meanwhile, 100 miles to the south in the second wave, a violent tornado went through Arcadia, Crawfordsville, and Sheridan, Indiana. Tornado was about half a mile wide. And caused several farmhouses to just simply disappear. Other notable violent tornadoes included an F4 that went through Kokomo, an F4 that went through Russiaville, and these F4s just kept spinning out of the sky. And I'll get to the ratings when I make a summary at the end. Meanwhile, while that was going on, after Indiana had its violent outbreak, its violent portion of the outbreak with several violent tornadoes, the system moves into the Buckeye State. It moves into Ohio. Another violent tornado touches down in Toledo. It throws a bus off an interstate, killing several people. It literally took a bus, lifted it, and threw it down below. It hit a paint manufacturing plant. It went on Lake Erie, sucked up a bunch of boats and threw them as far as a mile inland, including parts of boats that were found inside the paint manufacturing facility. That was a short-lived tornado, and it actually went northwest into Michigan. So while all that's going on, more tornadoes are going through Lima, Ohio, and then the second wave starts to. The third wave is gone. The second one is starting to act up. The top, the northernmost line goes over Lake Erie and dissipates. Now, one of the strongest tornadoes, and by the way, the Toledo tornado was also photographed as a double funnel, along with the three northern Indiana ones. So we already had 4. There were a total of 5 double funnel tornadoes, and here was the 5th one. At about 11 o'clock, and these storms had a high abundance of lightning. A tornado touched down in, I think it was Cuyahoga County. It's to the south of Cleveland. It passed through Grafton as an F2, and then immediately took F4 strength, and in the town of Pittsfield, almost everything vanished. The only thing that was left after that tornado went through was a Civil War monument. That's all that was left. It was a Civil War monument. Everything in the town was gone. Vanished without a trace. So as the tornado is going along, it goes into the community of Strongsville, Ohio. Several houses leveled, flattened, swept away cleanly, and along its 22-mile path, it split into 2 funnels, making it the 5th double tornado of the event, about half a mile apart. Continued doing extreme damage, and then shortly afterwards, boom, it ropes out, dissipates. The Strongsville tornado winds up killing 18 people. And in the aftermath, only 47 tornadoes touched down. 17 were classified as violent. That is 1 out of 3 tornadoes ranked violent. All 17 of those violent tornadoes were categorized and rated F4. There were no F5s. But 6 tornadoes from that particular outbreak are questionable F5s, and the Sheridan, Indiana tornado, which was an F4, is listed as an F5 in the National Climactic Data Center Memorandum. The other 5 tornadoes that are questionable F5s include both Dunlap tornadoes, the Rainbow Lake tornado, Toledo, and the Pittsfield Grafton Strongsville tornado. In fact, Dr. Fujita and well-known tornado historian meteorologist Thomas Grzoulis state that both Dunlap tornadoes were F5, and the Strongsville tornado is a widely accepted F5, but the National Weather Service does not support F5 ratings for any of those tornadoes. Yet Dr. Forbes stated that the tornado that was photographed as a double funnel was an F5. Now, entire subdivisions, it met the criteria, maybe, with all those tornadoes that was going on. It got so bad, Indiana, the whole South Bend area of that National Weather Service was placed under a blanket tornado warning. It was the first of 2 times. The other one, super outbreak, they just put the whole state under a blanket tornado warning. The primary cause of death was because all the power grids were knocked out and no weather wire came. The area didn't have tornado sirens. And in the aftermath, 47 tornadoes, 17 ranked F4. That's 1 out of every 3. That is the most violent ratio. 1 of 3. The super outbreak was 1 out of 5. So 1/3 of these tornadoes were violent. Now, as I mentioned, Dr. Fujita listed both Dunlap tornadoes and the Strongsville tornado as F5s. He listed it in a survey, and at the University of Chicago's DAPL survey, Damage Assessment Path Per Length Ratio. I think that's what DAPL stands for. In its aftermath, in addition to the tornadoes, 271 people were killed, making it the fourth deadliest outbreak, behind the tri-state outbreak, which killed over 700 people, the 2011 super outbreak that killed 340, the 1974 super outbreak that killed 315, and then of course Palm Sunday. This was basically a precursor, and meteorologists were left scratching their heads and in disbelief. They were able to forecast the severe weather, but they couldn't do anything about it. Radar was insufficient, and radar stations were limited. There were not any weather radars unless it was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, or somewhere. I can't think. But yeah, 47 tornadoes, 271 killed. There were well over 1,500 to 2,000 people injured, including 1,200 in Indiana alone. It ranks as Indiana's worst tornado outbreak in the Hoosier State's history. Hitting the Indiana, the Michiana, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio were the hardest hit states. And then the outbreak ended shortly after midnight, April 12th. So in my opinion, we had 11 F4s, 6 F5s in this outbreak. But the Sheridan, Indiana is listed, of course, as I said before, as an F5 in the NCDC memorandum. But in my opinion, all those questionable F5s were F5s. Fujita ranked them as F5. Brazoulis says they're F5. So, it's been 50 years since that event. I don't know what else to say. I think I explained the outbreak very well. The next video that I'll be putting out will more than likely be in a couple of weeks, discussing a outbreak that I had mentioned before, epic proportions. I was tracking it while tracking our weather up here. Wait a minute. And also along with a few other events that happened in late April, including Black Friday. I'll explain that. Let's see, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th. Yeah. And just ahead of time, the April 16th, 1998, there was a Tennessee's only F5 tornado. It's usually not well known. It hit Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, killed about 5 to 10 people. It was, of course, the second of 2 F5 tornadoes in 1998, 8 days after the Birmingham one. So, I'll keep you guys updated in comments about if anything else comes new with the Rochelle, Fairdale, Illinois tornado. I saw pictures of the damage, and I was just completely blown away. They didn't show this on the Weather Channel the next day. This came from people that lived through it. So I'll explain. I explained that tornado. I'll let you guys know if anything comes up on that. But this is definitely the first violent tornado of 2015. So, and the reason why the Rochelle Fairdale tornado was so strong was the fact the low pressure area was over Iowa. You had your cold front, you had your warm front. In most cases, the most intense tornadoes occur near those two frontal boundaries. It adds extra spin to it. You got the low pressure in the atmosphere, you got you had the jet stream there, you had low level jets coming in from the southwest, you had low level jets coming in from the southeast. That adds to the rotation. Inflow gets sucked up into the updraft of the supercell. The rotation was reported to be at least 20,000 feet high. These thunderstorms had echo tops of 40 to 45,000 feet, so it was intense. Now obviously the updraft goes in like this and goes up like this. Once you get to a certain point with the horizontal helicity, winds begin to turn with height. And if the updrafts are strong enough, it'll tilt the it'll tilt all the mid and upper level jets into a spin and will tip that. But it's got to be strong enough. It's got to be sufficient. It's got to be sufficient. The air cannot be completely dry, or otherwise that's going to choke it off. And you don't need rain-cooled air wrapping around the tornado, or otherwise that's going to cause it to gust out. And if it's a cyclic supercell, it'll just form another tornado on the other side of that boundary. But, as far as I know, 2 people have been confirmed dead, 22 injuries. In addition, I feel like I'm missing something. The downdraft causes that layered cake, the wall cloud. To cause a tornado to go down, you need a mid-level jet about 500 feet off the ground to get sucked in. You need the low-level jet and the downdraft to be able to yank down the rotation and bring it to a point just like a dancer brings herself in and spins on a pivot in which she'll spin faster. As soon as that touches the ground, you have a tornado. And what causes it to last that long? As long as it's got a supple amount of warm, moist, unstable air, it'll keep going. Low pressure, warm boundary, frontal boundary, inflow jets. A tornado is basically, as I've stated before many times, it's caused by a clash of air currents, and the physics are a little bit complicated, but you learn over time. So I will see you guys next time. And please stay safe, and I'll keep you guys safe. Sorry if thunderstorms didn't occur yesterday. The air stabilized and all we got was a rain event. So stay safe, I'll keep you guys safe, and I will see you next time.